Good
Good
morning and welcome to the very first BVSD LIBinar.
Woo!
Yes, and you might be wondering, what is a LIBinar? It's a library webinar, and we're so excited to start this with you this year. Our very first LIBinar is going to be hosted by our very own Nanette McMurtry. And we're having a little bit of bandwidth issues, but that's okay. Let me go to screen share. We're going to launch our presentation so that we can share our resources with you. Completely frozen.
Yeah, it is completely frozen. There it is.
There we go.
Here, wait, let's turn down the volume.
Okay.
We're going to adjust some bandwidth. You would think this early in the morning nobody else is using the internet. All right, that should help.
Okay, so we are going to go right into our presentation, which you should be seeing on your screen shortly. Okay, so hopefully you should be seeing our presentation now. Like I said, our very first BVSD LIBinar is today this morning, and I'm so excited to have Nanette, our library coordinator and ed tech specialist for the district, presenting today. And she's going to be talking about what the standards are for teacher librarians in our district. And as you are watching today, feel free to follow us along on Twitter. If you want to tweet about us, our hashtag is LIBinars. And you can also visit our BVSD Libraries blog to see a recording of this presentation later on. And that URL is bvsdlibraries.blogspot.com. So there's a couple different ways to get a hold of us and keep track of what's going on with LIBinars. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Nanette, and she's going to talk more about what teacher librarian standards are in Boulder Valley School District.
Thank you, Amy, and thanks, guys, this early morning, or of course you could be watching the recording tonight or a month from now. I'm really excited to talk to you guys about what are my standards. So you might be wondering where this presentation came from. It actually came from like a litany of emails that I received from teacher librarians at the beginning of the year when their principals have asked them to identify their standards. And there just seems to be confusion on the part of the librarian and on the part of leadership and teachers in our building to exactly what library standards are. What standards are we talking about this morning? You have two different kinds of standards as a librarian. Same as a teacher, there are standards for your performance as a teacher librarian, and those are the educator effectiveness standards and our recently published content connections documents you can read about on our blog. We're not talking about those standards today. The standards that we're talking about are the standards for students in literacy, information, library skills, and more, because that seems to be where the confusion is. Because there's been a big shift in what library standards look like in a building and in our school libraries. The same shift has kind of happened in classrooms. I remember as an English teacher, once a year, I would stop everything so we could do the big research paper. We don't do that anymore. And if we do, we really should stop. That's been the shift because now those research, information, and literacy skills, as well as digital literacy skills, are embedded everywhere in the content. In fact, not in every content area, but also in every grade level. And so that understanding is huge for teacher librarians because you're not in isolation anymore. Even teaching kids how to get around your library isn't a set of standardized skills because so many of you have set your libraries up in so many different ways. So these things are now embedded in what kids are actually doing in the classroom, and that carries over into what they're doing in the library. To better understand this, let's kind of take a journey through the standards. We have library standards and information literacy standards that are embedded at the national, state, and local levels. The national and state levels is what has fueled the local level, Boulder Valley School District's own curriculum adoption. And those are the ones that you need to be concerned with the most. However, to understand those and maybe even to get insight on what to do with those standards, we need to kind of understand where it is that they came from. So let's start with what does the nation's day. So there are a couple places for you to go to see kind of the broad understanding of what information and digital literacy standards and skills look like across the country and actually even internationally. The first is the American Association of School Librarians Standards for the 21st Century Learner. Many of you are probably familiar with this document. If I click this link, it's going to take a second to load, but it will take me to a PDF that you could actually, if you really wanted to, print out that walks through these broad standards for these kinds of information skills. The big thing to understand is these skills are not broken down by grade level or content area because they should be in every single grade level and content area. And we're going to see here in a little bit that they already are. A lot of you are really concerned with getting these embedded into our current standards, but they're already there. So you don't have to do that work. You just have to help teachers find them. So you can look and see these skills. There are 4 main areas that they've identified, and then they have kind of broken out skills underneath them. So these are the big AASL standards. The next one, of course, is the Common Core standards. Now, because of the work that BVSD has done with their curriculum documents, you don't have to sit and pore over these Common Core standards anymore. But this is another example of a place where standards are not broken out by information literacy skills or digital literacy skills as a separate strand, that they're embedded both in the math and literacy standards for Common Core. You're welcome to read through these, but you don't need to, like I said, because they're already embedded in what we have at the local level. But here's where this website is. The other thing to know, it's really helpful to know where these resources are in case parents do ask you, and even some of our newer teachers might need help understanding where to find these resources. So it's good for you guys to know that they're out there. And then, of course, the last national, and this is kind of an international level of standards, are the ISTE standards. The ISTE standards are extremely broad. Again, cross-content area, cross-grade level, every lesson, every time. But they're also already embedded in the Colorado academic standards, which were used to guide the creation of Boulder Valley School District standards. So you don't have to memorize these per se, but it is good to understand where this information is as well, because you can look on here and actually maybe even get ideas for what kids can do in the library to help build these particular skills as you identify them. So the national standards are providing all of the background knowledge you need to understand our state and local expectations. There are other places we could go to find national library standards or information standards, but we don't really need to because these are the big 3 that people refer to. And the exception to that is for your college board courses, so the AP and pre-AP courses, as well as the International Baccalaureate program schools. You guys have an additional set of standards that are being used, but you'll find if you really dig into the curriculum that most of those standards are embedded already in our content area work. So what does the state say? The state has 2 major documents to use when understanding 21st century information literacy skills. If you go to their library page right now and click on library skills, that page has been taken down because we don't teach these in isolation anymore. The expectation is that they are embedded. So the first is the Colorado academic standards. They go by CAS standards or CAS documents. What's really powerful about this page, if you don't know, is that you can search by content area and grade level. So I can select a content area, maybe I want to select mathematics, and then I can select a grade level, so I can hit kindergarten. These documents should look very familiar to you as they are the basis for all of the curriculum essential documents in Boulder Valley School Districts. So what we've done is taken them a step further and actually added to or clarified some things in these documents, but pretty much the core of the document remains the same. So if you ever need to find a particular standard at a particular grade level quickly, this is the best way to search for it. Through and actually read the mathematic expectations for kindergarten. These documents also provide like inquiry questions, which are things that we're always looking for as teachers and librarians that are planning lessons, as well as some ideas for what to do in the classroom. So that's where you can find the Colorado academic standards. But again, we have our own set in Boulder Valley. That's what we're getting. The other thing that we have are the Colorado standards for 21st century skills. So I'm going to click on that. And this is a brochure that a group of people at CDE, a group of teachers, librarians, got together and came up with what are the 21st century skills that we want every Colorado student to achieve. And this was adopted by CDE. You're going to recognize these skills from AASL and from ISTE. So those were documents that were very important in informing these particular skills. So you can go through and see critical thinking, invention, self-direction, what that means. And again, every content area, every grade level. So these big, broad ideas. Lots to look at through here. Most of you probably have this brochure already. Feel free to print it out if you'd like to have a print version. But again, these skills are embedded. And I think that's what's really powerful about this journey through our standards. So the last set of standards is, what does BVSD say? And BVSD, the work of, I guess, probably starting about 4 years ago, Boulder Valley School District teachers and educators and leaders developed the curriculum essential documents. And these CEDs are based on and come out of the work of Common Core and the Colorado Academic Standards. You will see the language of both of those reflected throughout all of these documents. So you don't need to go to Common Core and Colorado Academic Standards because it's all done for you in our CEDs. So when you go into our curriculum pages, this is on the BVSD website. You can see all of the different areas that have curriculum essential documents. So for example, I can click on social studies. And then you'll see curriculum and assessments. I'm going to click on curriculum because that's where the CEDs are located. And then you'll notice they're done by grade level or high school or secondary class. So like at the high school level, they're taking economics or psychology, US government, APUSH, those kinds of things. So they're spread out a little bit differently, but I can click on any of these documents. I'll just jump into 4th grade. And if I scroll down, you're going to see that these documents look much like the Colorado Academic Standards documents. They're just formatted slightly differently, and they have a couple additional maybe inquiry questions that are specific to our area, or some additional ideas. And so you can actually see the curriculum for each grade level for Boulder Valley School District through these websites. And this is your starting point. This is what our students are being held to in the classroom. As a librarian, it will be important for you to understand what is being asked of kids in each grade level that you serve. You're not expected to memorize these documents by any stretch of the imagination. However, it's probably good to familiarize yourself with some of the big concepts and skills that they need to master in each grade level, in each subject area. Now, I know at the secondary level that can be overwhelming. And so the expectation, of course, is not that this is, I mean, you could spend your whole life just analyzing these documents. It's just an understanding of what it is that kids are being asked to do. And we'll talk about why here in a second. So when your principal asks you, what are your standards in the library? You can say, these are my standards in the library, because everything that kids are doing in the classroom can be supported by what's happening in the library. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Before we do, I'm just going to make sure there aren't any questions. This early in the morning, we're not expecting there to be too much. No questions. And you can always email us questions later. So that's kind of the walk through the standards. And I think a lot of time I've seen teacher librarians say the ISTE standards are what their students are doing. And that's great. I mean, ISTE is a fantastic metric to use, but those ISTE standards can be found inside the curriculum that's already happening in Boulder Valley. So let's talk about how. Before we do, though, just a reminder about those tests. We could not possibly list every single test that every student will take at every grade level. However, CDE released a CMAS PARCC fact sheet that is linked here that is an infographic about the different kinds of tests that kids take in Colorado, as well as how that impacts instructional time. So you can click on this infographic right here and see that additional information. I think sometimes as teacher librarians, it's really important for us to understand the burden that our students are under when it comes to being assessed on these skills, because that's where we really can come into play with being that support for them. So what does this mean for the library? Like, what is your role with standards in the library? If the standards are just the curriculum essential documents, well, isn't that the teacher's job? So let's talk about how it's a little bit different for you. So how can you be a part of implementing standards in the library? The first way is helping to differentiate. There's a great example of this. Katie Gallagher is a second grade teacher at Mesa Elementary School, or I'm sorry, Flatirons Elementary School, and her librarian is Katie Darren. So the story of Katie and Katie. I was recently talking to the second grade teacher, Miss Gallagher, and she was sharing that she had recently met with her librarian to help her differentiate reading lessons for her upper level students. In the classroom, she realized that she wasn't able to provide a meaningful experience for her kids that were excelling at the current reading skills in front of them. And she needed some help scaffolding and extending their learning. So she reached out to her librarian, who is now taking that small group of kids for a small amount of time each week to do some major extensions with them, to challenge them as readers. Maybe that's through doing their own book talks or writing book blogs. They're kind of coming up with it together. But she's able to differentiate in a way that the current teacher wasn't able to do to the extent that she wanted to. And she used her librarian and partnered with her librarian to do that, which is super powerful. You can also differentiate for struggling learners. Maybe you provide some additional scaffolding in a way of flipped videos for research skills. I know some of our secondary teacher librarians do that. They provide kind of a repository of videos that kids can access to learn how to do different research skills, or understand how databases work, or how to search on the real world Google. And so they provide that scaffolding. So your role as a differentiator is huge, because so many times we have teachers in classrooms that have such a wide array of students that need that extra, either maybe scaffolding or extending of a lesson. So that's one way to implement standards in the library. Another way is to support what's happening in the classroom directly. There's a great example of this at Monarch K-8. Diane was sharing, the librarian Diane there, was recently sharing about how a lot of times teachers come with her with the standards that they won't be able to cover in class that year. And if you read through the standards, you're going to understand why. We are asking students to do a lot of things. So Diane covers those standards in the library. She's a direct support for the curriculum for those grade levels as they need it. And she is equipped to support those standards as well. That is another way that you can help. And I know a lot of you really enter into that role with the teachers you work with. You meet and you go, okay, how can I support what you're doing in the classroom? The last one that's really important is lead. It's powerful to have somebody in the building who has a big picture understanding of where kids are and where they need to go. As a librarian, when you understand all of the standards, or when you have a big picture understanding of the standards, you can help lead from one year to the next, understanding the cohesiveness of what was learned in kindergarten to second grade, and providing some expertise for that. And that's a unique role in a building, in that you actually have the capacity to be that person who understands kind of the whole picture of the child throughout all their years in the building. So we really see librarians in three areas: differentiating, supporting, and leading. So what does that mean for the library skills that used to be taught in isolation? Where do they appear? Luckily, some people have done that work for us. So this link will take you to what's called the Standards Crosswalk. The American Association of School Librarians, and in conjunction with the work of Common Core, came up with a document that is free to access, which is huge, that walks you through how their standards for the 21st century learner align with and are embedded in the Common Core state standards. So I can click, for example, on mathematics. It's going to take a second to load. These are really large documents. And it comes up with the broad standards and then the intricate grade level standards. So I can click on standard 1 for math. And it's going to bring up all of the Common Core standards that go with a particular concept. So for example, the AASL learning standard is follow an inquiry-based process in seeking knowledge in curricular subjects and make real-world connections. Where does that show up in the Common Core standards? And then the group picked out the Common Core standards that have that embedded in it. Huge, huge work. It's why I wanted you guys to understand how the national standards impacted our local standards, because you can use this work in looking for those correlations to the different subject areas. So the Common Core subject areas, of course, are only math and literacy. So this wasn't done for social studies or science. There's a writing standards for those subjects, but not the actual learning standards. Remember, Common Core is only literacy and math. But this is a great starting point. For you and your planning, though, there's a simple kind of chart or formula that you can use to help do some planning. So for example, you might be meeting with teachers and they might present a standard from their actual curriculum that they need some support or differentiation with. So you're going to write the standard down. So this is from the 4th grade social studies standard 1.1.b. It sounds fancy. Analyze primary source historical accounts related to Colorado history to understand cause and effect relationships. So as a librarian, you can identify the standards and skills that you see in there that are really connected to the work of the library. So I just put research skills, exclamation point. Understand how to identify primary sources, and then analyze that primary source to gather information. How do you read a photograph? How do you understand what a letter or a diary is? And how do I get the information I need from that? And also trust that information. Huge library skills that you can do to help them achieve that standards. So then the question that comes for you is, what can students do in the library? And how do we know they learned it? Those are the big pieces where all of your instructional expertise is so important, because you're going to provide experiences that are meaningful so that kids can achieve the skills they need to be able to fulfill that standard in their classroom. And then the big question, of course, is how do we know they learned it? And that's working back with the teacher, because that is your assessment to a certain extent. Is you might not be grading their projects, you might not be looking at their website that they create, but the teacher is. And that's a great conversation to go back to the teacher and say, hey, where were they on the skills that we did in the library? Did it help them achieve the standard? And if not, let's kind of rethink what the students are doing. So that's one way to address standards in the curriculum. There's of course a balance of it all. Yes, there are standards, but the standards alone aren't enough to really tell you what to do in the library. You have to have meaningful planning with teachers and students. And I say both teachers and students because students can be as powerful of collaborators with you, thinking about what they want to do as a teacher. But that planning time can be around that, how can I differentiate? How can I support? But then also, where can I lead? And then, of course, collaborative learning and leading experiences in the library. That's kind of your job, is to empower the voices of these students to be learners and to provide experiences that are really meaningful to them so that they are able to take back those skills and apply them to what they're doing in class. And that's really impacted by the role of the librarian. So when somebody asks what your standards are, you can say that they're embedded in the curriculum essential documents if you're talking about what students are doing in the library, and that you are a part of differentiating, supporting, and leading the implementation of those skills. So that's kind of the end of the spiel. I have a feeling we're still pretty even on the questions.
Don't see any questions yet.
Don't see any questions. What'll be great is we'll post this as a blog post. So if you have questions, you can post that in the comment section of the blog post.
So thank you, Nanette. This was actually really helpful. I was confused myself about how all these documents connected together. And now I really I understand more, and that's really helpful. And I think teacher librarians will find it helpful. I think that principals will find it helpful, and other teachers in the building will find it helpful. In our excitement of getting up and running, I neglected to introduce myself. I'm Amy Hitchner, and I'm the Technical Services Librarian for the district. So thank you so much for watching our very first BVSD LIBinar. Again, you will find the recording of this on our blog, which is bvsdlibraries.blogspot.com. And you can always email myself or Nanette for further follow-up questions. So thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.